Links to previous episodes are given in the video description, so don't forget to like, subscribe and share the video. The War Bride's Oath. Episode 9. My aunt was the one who acted most like a mother figure to me, and also took care of my mother, explained Raphael. Because of her being unable to stand being around men, she had a quiet, secluded life. Meanwhile, my father kept leading the family outside the capital, as we were originally travelers. I think she is the main reason we ended up here in the first place. My mother's knowledge in medicine took our family in a new direction, leading us to where we are today. So your mother was the only woman from the Rain tribe? Asked Tessandra. We were told there were other people with your tribe. Oh, there are. My mother was actually the first adult from the Rain tribe to join the family. My father fell for her after seeing her at a slave auction, although he'd never owned a slave before. He then tried to find and buy back more of her people, trying to help my mother overcome her traumatic past. He even renamed our family after it became clear her knowledge of medicine would be the new focus of our people. The other people from the Rain tribe he found were 3 young women and 6 children. One of the young women sadly committed suicide shortly after, and another one died in childbirth. The last one is still doing fine as of today, and she's traveling with our people as we speak. She's happily married with 5 children, and I'd love to introduce her to you if we get the chance. What about the children? Asked Cecilia. Raphael turned to her and nodded. 2 died of disease, but the 4 others grew up fine, and are actually our best doctors. They are not fond of the capital, though. They live with the itinerant part of our family with their own families. Can I ask about your mothers? To be honest, we have only heard from afar about the stories from the few people who could travel between here and the Empire. Cecilia and Tessandra exchanged a smile. Our mothers are named Cassandra and Missandra. Their maternal grandfather was the tribe's chief. They were captured and sold separately after the attack. My mother became a slave for nobles before she met my dad and they fell in love. My mother was sold to the prostitution district and worked until a patron helped her buy her freedom, said Tessandra. She was already a free woman when she and my aunt reunited. After a while, she actually married one of the Empress' other half-brothers, my dad, and Ceci's paternal uncle. Ceci and I are actually cousins from both sides. Since then, they have both been looking for other people from the original Rain tribe, and they've only found a handful of their descendants so far. That's heartwarming to know, smiled Raphael. I wish my mother had been alive to hear that some of her relatives survived. Can we ask her name? Handira. My mom's name was Handira. She did mention a village chief a couple of times, but that's all I know, I'm sorry. It's already plenty, Cecilia said with a smile. We will tell our mothers more of their people survived. Did you ever go to the village? Cecilia and Tessandra exchanged a shocked look. It's still there, muttered Tessandra. Well, there isn't much left, sighed Raphael, but the location is to the south of this continent. I was shocked at how it is exactly on the border between the 2 countries, to be honest. I went there a couple of times to pay my respects. There isn't much to see, though, so do not expect anything if you go. Grave robbers stole whatever the soldiers hadn't already taken. We will go, said Cecilia, not even thinking twice. They hadn't even thought about the possibility of ever seeing the remains of the Rain tribe's village. That place had always been an enigma to them, the remnant of a memory their mothers shared with them. To think they'd be able to go was a bit unreal. I believe Ishura shared with you a present. Thank you for that. Cecilia nodded. I'm afraid we don't have much more to offer, honestly. The knowledge we have is mostly what the Rain tribe gave my mother, and what she gave us. Although we have done our best to increase that knowledge, you will have probably seen as much from your mothers. It doesn't matter. This is proof that their people survived even on this side of the border. It's not like we were expecting much, truthfully, added Tessa. Our mothers were pretty realistic even when they began searching for their people. It's good to know at least a few more survived. But, do you know more about who was really the first to attack? Hephael sighed. My father's words got to you, didn't they? To be honest, I never got a straight answer either. They all said everything happened so fast, and some soldiers were fighting on top of everything. Their descriptions of their armor weren't described the same way twice, and given that they were taken into foreign lands when they'd never taken a step outside of their village. Cecilia and Tessandra nodded, but both girls were left to their own thoughts. Hephael was right, it did bother them a bit. When Ishura kindly invited them to start dining, the young family leader helped himself too. To tell you the truth, I think your mothers were luckier being in the Dragon Empire. No offense, but the Eastern Kingdom wasn't exactly a great place for my mother and her peers to start a new life. They went from near genocide to a country struck by several civil wars. Yeah, scoffed Tessa, we had the pleasure of meeting His Majesty. He briefly glanced his cousin's way, exchanging an enigmatic look with her. Cecilia caught sight of that. Do you have a different opinion on the king? I'm not fond of that man, to say the least. But I know his return put an end to the war, and he has been doing lots to improve life in the capital. Truth be told, the White King is barely holding the clans in a relative state of peace. This isn't going to last long, sadly. We have known many civil wars to tell this much. The clans just don't get along, and one is going to overthrow the others sooner or later unless we get a more capable ruler. The king seems to be doing what he can, said Cecilia, a bit upset. And although I am also not fond of the guy, added Tessandra, it looks to me like the clans aren't making much of an effort to get along either. Her accusing eyes were on Ishura, still holding to heart the fact that Naptuni wasn't invited. Cecilia pulled her cousin's sleeve a bit, but Tessandra ignored her. Since we've come here, she continued, all we've seen are catty women fighting to become queen, people trying to murder us inside the capital, and someone was even killed inside the castle. None of that was the king's doing, from what we know. That wasn't our doing either, retorted Ishura. That was all the other clans doing. The Pangaha, the Yekara, even the Kunu. But I thought the Kunu tribe was dead, muttered Cecilia. Those people are mercenaries, assassins, sighed Hephael. I wish the king did get rid of those murderers for good, but the rumors are already saying they aren't gone. They might be gathering their strength and planning their revenge as we speak. Ishura nodded in agreement before adding to what Hephael said. The Kunu consider themselves abandoned warriors, but they turned into nothing better than ruthless mercenaries over the years. No one had the money to employ their expensive services anymore, so they took whatever they wanted instead. The worst. They are what happened to soldiers once the kings that used them couldn't pay them. Raphael sighed and ate a couple of bites with a pensive expression. They are only one of the worst symptoms of a sick nation. People out of employment. Resentment, anger. People are ready to do anything to survive, even at the expense of their fellow citizens. The people who do not belong to a clan have it hard too. Many families have disappeared without anyone batting an eye for them. Roaming around the kingdom's lands has shown me a lot of the bleeding injuries of this kingdom. We saw it too. But you think changing your ruler is going to bring peace? Raphael shook his head. Maybe not. But, we might not be the only ones thinking so. The stronger clans didn't appreciate the king putting small families like us on an equal footing with them, explained Ishira. They treat us with contempt, thinking they should still be respected like they were in times of war. They want martial law back, so they can exercise their power even more than now. Many supported the king because they thought they would get extensive rewards like with the previous king, but the treasury was long empty when the war ended, and the king isn't giving them the little bit of money the state has. He won't favor them, and that's what's making them unhappy. They believe they were wronged, however. Now people need healers, food, and for all the businesses to resume. Thankfully for us, the Pangaha and Yekara don't get along. Otherwise, those two clans allied might be enough to take us all down. However, none of the other families are willing to follow them either. Except perhaps for the Nahaf, the other families like their independence, and would rather follow an illegitimate king. So aside from the two stronger clans, said Tessandra, you're saying most of the other clans are fine supporting the king, right? It's more complicated than that. Most haven't fully made up their minds yet, to be fair. They are all careful, after what happened with the previous king, they are scared to make the wrong choice again. At the moment, most think the choice of the future queen will be what seals the deal, or adds fuel to the fire. They hope the queen will be of their clan, nodded Tessandra, or someone they can approve of. Exactly, nodded Raphael. People have a hard time believing the tyrant's son, so we are all waiting to see what his decision for his queen will reveal about him. Hence, all the lords voted for this competition. It's basically a political tug-of-war. I have to say, the arrival of a princess from the Dragon Empire did shed new light on the game, though. We noticed, scoffed Tessandra. Some are ready to support Ceci, others want to kill her. It's tense for us too, to say the least. I want to help, said Ceci, but I understand the stability between the families might be more important right now. It might be too late for that. Raphael put down his glass, crossing his fingers together with a serious expression. To be honest, most clans are already very wary of each other, and the competition exacerbated that. If something happens, I'm afraid it will be near impossible to have us work together to riposte. We simply don't have the power to oppose the Yekara or the Pangaha. We are doctors, the Sesan are artists, and the Darosaf are fishermen. I'm making it rather simple, but when push comes to shove, it will be a follow or flee situation for everyone. There are only two situations out of this. He lifted his index. 1. we find a way to all unite, but like I said, this is nearly impossible in the current climate. It would take a miracle, or for the Cheshi to step up. They are the only other clan that all the small tribes would be willing to listen to. They also probably still have the political strength to do something. Sadly, they've been rather quiet for a while now, so we don't know what their opinions are. He lifted his thumb. 2. If there were someone strong enough to support the king and help him subjugate the rebellious clans. Someone really strong, but also fair enough that the clans would be comfortable following them and uniting behind them. A strong queen would be the perfect example of that. You mean someone like Ceci, said Tessandra. Exactly. That's why many tribes have approached you already, haven't they? To be fair, some candidates were appointed more to watch the king than to really compete. They don't care about becoming queen, but they want to see if the king will react to them, if he even considers someone other than the Yekara or Pangaha women. Turns out he does, muttered Ishara, glancing Cecilia's way. But your interest in me is because I'm a Dragon Empire daughter. Yes, and no. Putting that aside, you're also someone who's not allied with any of the clans but is still a strong contender. If I may say so, you're a big hope for many of us. It may sound strange, but many of the tribes would rather have a foreigner on the throne than a corrupt queen. A lot of things were beginning to make more sense to Cecilia now. The other candidates tolerated her because she was an all-right option for the king, and because she was essentially one of the only possible alternatives to the worst, the Pangaha and Yekara candidates. Have you tried reaching out to the Cheshi clan? Cecilia asked. We tried, but I have no idea what they are thinking at the moment. They have closed the doors to their residences and won't appear at all. From what I know, they refused to meet the other tribes as well. They might be watching the competition as well, and waiting for the outcome. They are cowards then, scoffed Tessa. A silence followed her statement. Hephael and his cousin exchanged a glance, but obviously, they had nothing to answer to that. They didn't know what was going on with that tribe, and it did feel like they were somewhat hiding from the current events. The question was, when would they finally get involved? Can I ask? Muttered Cecilia. What about that woman? The king's mistress. That woman, Hephael frowned. I guess you've met her. She said to ask you about her past. Ishara grimaced. She's not one of us, she immediately said, if that's what you want to know. But she is part of the Rain tribe too, isn't she? Hephael let out a long sigh as if it cost him to talk about this. We had no idea about her existence until a while ago, honestly. She wasn't among the children my father bought back, she had her own life, far from our family. But yes, she's part of the Rain tribe, like us. Then what is it you're not telling us? Frowned Tessandra. You don't like her either, it seems. Not really. She was never a Hashit, and she sided with the king ever since she appeared. When we tried to reach out to her, that's when we learned of her background, and we immediately cut ties. Cecilia and Tessandra exchanged a glance, surprised. What is it? She was born out of a rape, said Hephael. Not here, but on the Dragon Empire's side. Because of that, that girl was loathed by her mother, and raised by her father. Her father eventually killed her mother from too much abuse, and was left alone with his daughter, abusing her next. She freed herself by killing him, and fled here, to the Eastern Kingdom. That's when we met her, among a group of refugees. But that woman, she's still very much damaged. No wonder. But she killed her abuser of a father and avenged her mother. I get the twisted part, but if you couldn't rescue her, couldn't you have? I don't know, at least helped her? I'm by no means fond of that woman, but her father was the monster, not Giselle. Ishra and Raphael exchanged a very awkward look. Cecilia understood there was something more to this story. We would have, muttered Raphael, but her father was the one from the Rain tribe. A long, heavy silence followed his words. Cecilia and Tessandra exchanged a look, both completely stunned. They had never imagined they would hear such a thing today. Her father, muttered Tessandra, shocked. Yeah, that was a lot for us too. But after that, we understood she would not be very fond of our family, no matter what we did. For her, the Rain tribe is her cursed heritage, so she went on her own. Tessandra combed her hair back, still in shock. She and Cecilia exchanged a glance, appalled at what they had heard. They knew war was the cradle for a lot of horrible and tragic stories, but this one was truly unexpected. They were even a bit glad their mothers weren't present to hear this. Is that it? Finally muttered Tessandra. Pretty much. It's not like she welcomed us with open arms, we barely exchanged a few words before she made it clear she did not want our help. She was still young the first time we met her. I don't think she hates the Rain tribe, per se, muttered Ishra. From what we understood, it's more like she has a strange fascination for it. She did learn the same knowledge as we did about medicine and plants. Well, I guess Daddy taught her a thing or two between beatings, grumbled Tessandra. Great. Father of the Year. Cecilia frowned. She was still preoccupied with a lot of things Giselle had said, especially her mentioning she was a dragon's daughter. Did she mean her heritage from her father's side or her mother's? Something was still making her uneasy about all of this. You said she had always been by His Majesty's side. Well, that is after she reappeared, said Ishra. We met her once, years ago, probably right after she had run from the Empire amongst refugees, but before we could find out more, she fled from us, and the next time we saw her, she had somehow become the king's right hand, and his mistress. In any case, she refused our help, declared Raphael. She is not someone we'd trust. We suspect she has interests with the stronger clans more than the likes of us. Tessandra scoffed. They had noticed the same, and they probably wouldn't trust that woman either. Despite her underhanded attempts at befriending this duo of cousins, Cecilia just could not shake off that negative feeling she had toward that woman, even if they somehow looked alike. Tessandra was the same. Something in their instincts was constantly warning them about Giselle, something they couldn't quite put their fingers on just yet. All you know about her might be a lie as well, muttered Tessandra. It's hard to know if that snake ever spits out anything real. In any case, we don't consider ourselves involved with her, nodded Raphael. That was about all Cecilia wanted to know. Anything else she wanted to know, she would have to sort out with Giselle herself, since it was clear that the woman's origins were still a mystery. Had she suggested they ask the Hashut just so they would hear about her father and be less wary of her? A part of Cecilia did believe that story to be true, but she also thought some things just didn't match. She let out a long sigh and shook her head. "Thank you for telling us what you know," she finally said. "I'm sorry it's not much. At the very least, if you wish to visit the remains of the Rain Village, let me know. I'll accompany you there." "I owe you that much." "You don't owe us anything," said Tessa. "Your father took care of the few survivors on this side of the border, it's already more than we hoped for." "Do you think you found them all?" "Sadly, yes. Our family has been roaming this kingdom for long enough. I don't believe there is a village or city we haven't visited twice, even the ones occupied by bandits," Cecilia said, surprised. Raphael sighed and grabbed a piece of meat to chew a bit before answering. "Yes. Our family has managed to arrange some understanding with those bandits. A lot of them are soldiers who have resentment against the king or the clans, but they don't have any interest in attacking healers, so we make sure they recognize us from afar, and let us in. We heal the sick among them for free if they don't attack us and let us through. It may sound surprising, but we are careful not to carry anything of value, only medicinal herbs, and our knowledge. We make sure to hunt or fish and eat far from them, we don't take any risks. Some do try to attack," said Ishira, "but we have the means to fight back too." "Like poisons?" "No. Some of our men have learned how to fight, and we also tamed falcons so they could hunt down an enemy. In short, we made sure there is more to risk attacking us than to win for those bandits. It's not like a lot of them are simply lying in wait to attack us, either. The truth is, many of them are struggling to survive. Ransacking a village provides short-term relief, but without anyone to take care of the fields and produce the food, money runs out eventually. But it has been 5 years since your king came back. How come those bandits haven't given up?" Ishira and Raphael exchanged a look, almost looking surprised. "Well, it's not like all those men took those villages 5 years ago. They gradually left the capital once it became clear their master hadn't won and there would be no one to pay them. Some have only arrived in those villages up to a few months ago. It's not something that can last, though," said Tessandra. "We saw one of those villages the king freed, and it was already a wreck before." Raphael nodded, putting his hands on his knees with a very serious expression. "I know. I happened to stop by the Muram village on my way here, and we heard about a little group who had come with a dragon. What you did there also helped convince me Lady Cecilia might be exactly who we need to fix what can be fixed in this kingdom. I will be speaking as the Hashut family's leader now. We will align ourselves behind Lady Cecilia, from now on. It was important for me to meet you and confirm your intentions." "You say that, but isn't your father still the leader?" frowned Tessandra. "He did not give us the same impression." "My father is the leader in title only," the young man retorted. "This helped me stay away from the capital and the king's eye. People of our tribe will listen to me, I promise. Ishira is like my younger sister as well as my representative in the capital. You may ask her anything in my stead, and she will provide you with anything you request if it is within our power." Tessandra glanced at her cousin, waiting for her. Although she had been the one speaking the most, no one was mistaken as to who was the princess. Cecilia was quietly listening, but she was the one making the decisions. What if the king is under threat? Raphael and Ishira were both surprised by her question. They were ready to be loyal to her, but they hadn't been clear about their position toward the king, and she had picked up on that. Cecilia wanted to be sure they wouldn't run the minute Ashen was under attack himself. She might be a decent candidate for queen, but it would all be meaningless if anything happened to the king. She was a foreigner, and couldn't become queen if there was no one to marry. Right now, she was glad for their support, but it was all very fleeting, and conditional to Ashen making her his queen. Their hesitation in answering spoke volumes in their stead. "Didn't he make you guys rich, though?" said Tessandra, frowning. "You said it yourself. The Hashid family was like any other before the king rose your status and gave you mansions inside the capital." Raphael lowered his head, nodding faintly. "That is true, but, for the longest time, we had suspicions about the king's intentions. See, it is not the first time a king has risen a family's status, only to use them and abandon them afterward." "Ashen is not his father," declared Cecilia, a hint of anger in her voice. "You sound like you're familiar with His Majesty," noted Ishira, surprised. "The king has a history with my family. I didn't come here only because Councillor Yasim invited me. I came to become his queen." Raphael and Ishira stayed mute in surprise, both staring at her dumbfounded, but it was only to be expected. This was the first time she was revealing her personal interest in Ashen, and speaking so vehemently too. Cecilia blushed a little once she realized that and grabbed some food to try and act normal. Next to her, though, Tessandra had a faint smile on. Only at times like this did her cousin leave her shy demeanor aside to shine, when she was determined and ready to fight for who or what she believed in. "See," she chuckled. "My cousin is pretty stubborn when it comes to these things. You guys may be fine making promises to someone who has yet to become queen, but you can't keep stalling and hesitating any longer. The Yekara and Pangaha clans you fear so much have made their choices already. It's only a matter of time before they try to overtake the throne." Ishira's face went pale, and she dropped her cutlery. "What are you saying? It's easy to lie in wait when you're hiding behind a king you don't even trust," Tessandra continued. "You can't simply shift your hideout to my cousin's shadow and pretend you'll be all good once this is over and sorted. That's not what we said. Then make a real decision." Their eyes shifted to Cecilia, whose green eyes looked more emerald than ever, shining and almost reptilian. Right now, she had changed from her shy demeanor from earlier to a completely different woman. They could see the Empire's eldest princess in her. It was as if she'd matured and grown a few inches in the blink of an eye. Her presence was suddenly overpowering them. Even Tessandra seemed to have taken a back seat behind her. "I will side with King Ashen," she declared. "If your family simply waits for me to become queen to openly support me, I won't consider your intentions as genuine. I will not accept a coward, even if they are related to my mother." "How can you call us cowards?" exclaimed Ishira. "We have been doing all." Before she could finish that sentence, her cousin grabbed her shoulder and had her quietly sit back down, his eyes on Cecilia. Raphael was clearly more lucid about the princess' clear warning, and more realistic too. He had underestimated her because she seemed to be of a kind nature like her mother, but right now, she had the aura of a war god's daughter. You hide far from the capital and behind your father, Cecilia continued. You want to support me, but you are not ready to take action. The other clans have already tried to kill me, and they will keep on doing so. I can't trust people who are all talk and no action. What about the other tribes you met? Asked Betrayal, frowning. I thought the princess would be more willing to trust our Hashut family, but it looks to me like you're asking us to be on the front lines while letting the Dorosaf and Seson remain hidden. Naptuni and her uncle are with us every day, retorted Cecilia, a hint more anger in her voice. No one ignores the fact that the Dorosaf tribe is now my ally. And don't you think you, of all people, should be more supportive of us than the Seson tribe, added Tessandra. You knew who we were, our common ties to the Rain tribe's legacy, but they reached out to us first, and even offered an opportunity to trade with the Empire, knowing full well how risky that was. I believe the Hashut should be more proactive than them. Your family might only be healers, but you're powerful enough to openly display which candidate you will support. Did you even consider that the smaller families might be looking up to you? The two of them exchanged a glance as if really surprised by her words. They clearly hadn't even considered the influence they had over other tribes. Well, we don't mix with the other families, you should start, Cecilia coldly retorted. You're one kingdom, one people. You can't act like you don't care what happens to each other anymore and push the liability onto others. Otherwise, there is no use in waiting for a queen. You are all already letting the other clans win by not doing anything. If the tribes don't unite together against those clans, neither the king nor I will be able to do anything. Your passiveness will be the downfall of this kingdom. A heavy silence followed her words. Ishara looked as if she had just been slapped awake, while her cousin's face held a stern, indecipherable expression. Neither of them could say a thing, and Cecilia was done talking too. Next to her, Tessandra was simply refilling her own plate with more meat, a satisfied smile on her lips. I see we underestimated the princess, finally muttered Betrayal. His cousin glanced his way, looking a bit worried and unsure about what was going on now, keeping her lips sealed. Meanwhile, Betrayal grabbed the teapot and refilled Cecilia's cup himself, an obvious gesture of submission from someone who had his cousin serve him all along. I'll admit, I was raised to put the needs of my family first and foremost. Never did I envision the day would come so soon when I would consider partnering up with other tribes. Our knowledge in medicine was always sufficient to maintain our way of life. Cecilia looked a lot calmer now, but she accepted the cup of tea with a faint nod, bringing it to her lips gracefully. She took a sip and put the cup down before talking again. The best doctors learn not from other doctors, but from other cultures. The Seson tribe can sew things in better ways than I have seen before, and I want to try their techniques on fresh wounds. The Dorosaf know the properties and nutritious values of fish and have studied algae so much they can use it for health benefits as well. No one is only good at one thing, but if you combine many people's talents, you learn and improve even faster. If you keep yourselves to yourselves, added Tessandra, you are bound to hit a slump sooner or later. No offense, but I'll bet your medicine hasn't improved much from what your mother taught you already. Hephael and Ishura's expressions betrayed them before they could even come up with a response to that. Eventually, the young leader sighed, defeated. He didn't look like he had lost to Cecilia in any way, though. In fact, he smiled confidently, slowly nodding. Lady Cecilia, you exceeded my expectations, by far. I did not expect to be lectured today, but I'll bow down without shame to your words. You've proven not to be a princess in name only, but a woman of character and great insight, and I respect that. In fact, I am more confident than ever in supporting our future queen. I will set my doubts about King Ashen aside for your sake, and trust the king the lady has chosen. If you prove yourself as our future ruler, I will also step up, as you requested. The Hashid family will no longer hide. How can we prove our loyalty to you? Hephael, muttered his cousin, a bit worried about what she could ask. Cecilia's answer came right away. Reach out to the other tribes, she said in an imperious tone. The Sesson, the Dorosaf, and even those who have yet to take a side. Do not wait for me, create an alliance with them. Aren't you worried we'll create an alliance in favor of another candidate? Hephael raised an eyebrow. I don't believe you will be able to betray me if you can't agree on another candidate. We know most of the smaller tribes have chosen a candidate without real belief they will be picked by the king, but now, you have an opportunity to take a real stance, by supporting me. Tessandra loudly put down her own cup, giving them a cunning smile. On a side note, I'll add what Ceci here is too nice to tell you, that you guys really better not dare betray us. Our family has a history of cutting off toxic relatives. Quite literally. We will remember that, nodded Hephael, the corner of his lips lifted. However, we are not liars or traitors, and as my lady mentioned, we won't keep acting like cowards either. I'm sure you'll see the result of this very soon. He was most likely referring to the upcoming banquet, but Cecilia didn't need to inquire any further. She smiled back at him and they resumed eating as if this conversation had been very natural. For the rest of the meal, they didn't mention anything else about tribes, conspiracies, or rival clans. In fact, they quite happily chatted about their medicinal knowledge and the differences between the empire and the kingdom. Each side of the surviving Rain tribe had perfected their knowledge according to the new ingredients and herbs they had found, and Cecilia was quite happy to chat about their respective discoveries with Hephael and Ishura. They had asserted they were probably something like distant cousins, and now that the hardest and most serious part of the conversation was over, they were acting quite familiarly. Tessandra and Hephael happily drank together, each boasting about their talent for handling alcohol, while Ishura and Cecilia much rather enjoyed staying sober to discuss more complex medicine. Each duo had begun more naturally leaning toward each other, and Cecilia noticed how Ishura smiled while staring at her cousin. You two seem close, she whispered. Oh, in my heart, Hephael is as close as an older brother. We were raised together by my mother, and since we don't have other siblings, it was always just the two of us. He's always been very protective of me since I lacked a father figure. You have many siblings, right, Lady Cecilia? Are you close to them as well? I am. Cecilia smiled. I have 2 older brothers, and they do tend to be very protective, but they are nice. I have 5 younger siblings too. It must be nice growing up in a large family. It was always just me and my mother. My father died when I was young, and my uncle never cared much for us. He was always too concerned about his wife, and almost jealous about how close my mom had gotten to her, unlike Raphael. My cousin always made time for me and my mom who helped raise him, despite taking on a lot of responsibilities since he was young. I knew he was growing up to become the family leader, so I did my best to become one of our best healers as well. Just so I would be useful to him. He never pressured me to get married, either. I'm the one who offered to volunteer as a candidate. Really? But his father. My uncle is a sad man, Ishira muttered. Although we don't approve of his ways, neither of us really blame him. After tonight, I guess Raphael will take his position as the official leader, to make your request doable. My uncle won't agree to it, but he'll step down. He already knows who our family will follow. Cecilia didn't answer that, only glancing Raphael's way. The young man seemed to be having fun with Tessandra, far from the serious family leader he had acted as just before. It was one fun night for the four young people, now that they had become closer, and it did feel like they belonged to the same family. "Do you believe you can do it?" she asked. "Become our queen." "I believe it." Cecilia's answer wasn't arrogant or hesitant. Despite her stutter, she had said it the most calm and honest way possible, not even blinking. "Good," smiled Ishira. "I'll hold you to that. And then, I hope our nations will be able to create ties again. It's my dream to visit the Dragon Empire." "Really?" Cecilia asked, a bit surprised. Ishira blushed and nodded. She suddenly looked a bit younger, finally acting like a young woman her age rather than a family representative. It was obvious she had finally let her guard down with Cecilia. She leaned a bit closer, like a friend about to share a secret. "I am rather admirative of your mother," she whispered. "Since I was a child and heard of her achievements, I always wondered what kind of woman she was, to free herself from slavery and become such an important healer for an empire. We don't have many examples of women becoming such important figures, except for the Empress, of course, but the Empress is almost akin to a scary deity, while your mother's love story with your father has crossed the border as a tale that would make more than one girl dream." Cecilia felt a bit strange, hearing about her parents in such a way. She knew their story was quite unique, but she had grown up observing them, and she was somewhat used to it. A close, loving family was the norm for her. She knew by heart the way her father's dark eyes always looked for her mother, like a dragon fiercely guarding its treasure. Meanwhile, her mother was the pillar of their family, the one they all gravitated toward. In a way, perhaps she had always been influenced by those two and their love story. Cecilia had never been interested in boys before she met Ashen, and once she had met him, there had never been anyone else for her. "My grandmother has a theory that dragons only have one real partner in their life," said Cecilia. "My father's dragon knew my mother was the one for him since the moment he saw her." "That's even better than what I had heard," smiled Ishira. "Do you see the king like that too?" "Me? I saw how your eyes changed each time we mentioned His Majesty, and I have seen you two in the same room. He might not be a dragon, but the candidates are all jealous because it's clear the king is different with you, Lady Cecilia. Honestly, you make it easy for us to give up on this competition." No one wants to pursue a man who only has eyes for one woman. Cecilia wished this was true. Sadly, there was more than one woman still aiming for Ashen, and they wouldn't give up easily. Thinking about the rivalry for the king's heart, or at the very least the position of his queen, made her long for him more. She glanced out the window, noticing how the sun had gone down already. On the other side of the table, Tessandra looked a bit too drunk, but it made her smile. At least her cousin had fun and forgot about her love troubles for a short while. It did feel like they had made new friends, if not, new relatives. She decided it was time they left the Hashut cousins and politely bid them farewell, after thanking them for the meal. Hephiel promised he'd keep to their agreement, and Ishura added they'd always be welcome in their properties. The young woman wasn't going back to the castle that night, instead, staying there to discuss some of their family affairs with her cousin, so Cecilia was left to take a staggering Tessandra back by herself. "Tessa, you've really overdone it tonight," she sighed, helping her down the street. "Sorry, their wine was good." "Oh, I should have asked Mr. Handsome what it's called or something." "Mr. Handsome?" Cecilia repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Oh come on Ceci, he's easy on the eye, isn't he?" "Yes, but he's almost a relative." "And what about Sabale?" "I don't want to talk about him. He can keep brooding and ignoring me if he wants, I do not care for him anymore." "I don't care. I'd rather go and lick a dragon than see him again." "Oh, that's a bit harsh." The two girls stopped and turned around, only to see a blushing Sabale standing awkwardly behind them. This time, he wasn't wearing his armor, only a plain white shirt that was still open enough to show his muscular torso. Cecilia was a bit surprised to see him there, but judging how close they still were to the Hashut residence and the direction he had come from, it looked like he had been waiting for them to come out. She realized he might have gotten a little tip from his sister on where to find them. Cecilia smiled, a bit relieved to see his sorry expression, and his two different colored eyes on her cousin. Tessandra, however, wasn't of the same opinion. She glared. "There he goes, that coward. He's done for the day, and he has the guts to show up, with that get-up too. Who do you think you are, to appear all hot like that in the middle of the night?" "I'm not tempted at all." "It does not work." Confused, Sabale looked down at his outfit, completely unaware of his own charms. Cecilia couldn't really blame her cousin, the young man was indeed quite attractive, even more so while wearing fitted clothes rather than heavy armor. His leather pants and boots were dark and highlighted his silhouette, and a blue, colorful scarf was tied around his waist. "Sorry," muttered Cecilia. "She's a bit drunk." "I'm not drunk. And I am not tempted to jump on that pirate. Where did you get such a girly scarf? Why would you wear what another gave you? I haven't had a chance to buy you anything yet. Take it off." "Tessa. It was a present from my sister." Cecilia was almost more shocked to hear Sabale genuinely trying to explain himself apologetically than her cousin's shameful behavior. Ignoring him and Cecilia's attempts to hold her back, Tessandra staggered up to the young soldier and angrily tried to take off his scarf. Her fingers were unable to untie anything in her state, but having her fidgeting around his waist area made Sabale blush uncontrollably, and he didn't even dare try to stop her. I'm sorry," he muttered, his eyes down on Tessandra's uncontrollable hands. "Shut up," she retorted. "Shut up, you and your mouth. I don't care. You're crazy, and you're... I'm sorry," he muttered again. "I didn't mean to act cold this morning, but I was just surprised, and I needed to collect my thoughts." "Shut up!" Tessandra's shouting was assorted with a violent slap on his torso that cut his breath. He coughed a couple of times, his eyes opened wide in surprise. Behind him, Cecilia grimaced. "I'm sorry, Sabale," she said. "Tessa gets a bit hard to handle when she's drunk." "No," muttered the young man, trying to regain his composure. "I'm the one who made her upset, I should be able to handle this much. It's my fault." Tessa suddenly grabbed his collar and kissed him. Sabale was so stunned, he kept his eyes wide open on Tessandra and froze completely. Behind them, Cecilia face-palmed. "Goodness, Tessa," she muttered. Right after, Tessandra ended their kiss, her hands still on Sabale's collar with a proud smile. "There," she exclaimed, visibly satisfied. "Now, you're mine." Thanks," dropped Sabale, at a complete loss of what else to say. "Shut up," retorted Tessandra, frowning. "You shut up. Don't add anything." "Sorry. I'm sleepy," groaned the willful young woman. "Take me to bed." Behind them, Cecilia was completely at a loss. She had seen Tessandra become a handful when drunk, sometimes too violent as she didn't control her strength, and willful too, usually toward her dad, but never with a man her age. She silently apologized to Sabale but, much to her surprise, the young royal guard didn't seem offended at all. He sighed, and as if it was natural, lifted Tessa up, letting her wrap her arms around his neck and rest her head on his shoulder. Curled up in the soldier's arms, the young warrior didn't seem so feisty anymore. She was probably going to fall asleep long before they reached the castle. A smile appeared on Cecilia's lips, although it was likely her cousin would flip over all her bold actions the next morning. "Sorry about this," she muttered to Sabale. Tessa was bit uneasy about what happened this morning. "You probably mean my attitude," sighed Sabale. "My apologies, I just needed a bit of time. I've never been with a lady like Tessandra before. I'm not used to bold women. It made me a bit insecure as a man." "What about now?" she asked carefully, glancing at her cousin's peaceful figure. "I am still working on it. But I think running from Lady Tessa isn't going to give me the answers or the resolution I need." Cecilia smiled, relieved for the two of them. Sabale wasn't as stubborn as he seemed, and he was a good man. Becoming the interest of a girl like Tessandra was likely forcing him to reconsider the values he had grown up with, as well as challenging his own pride. It probably wasn't easy, but he had come back anyway. Perhaps those two would be able to find the key to their understanding after all. For a little while, neither of them added anything, both lost in their thoughts while on the way back to the castle. Cecilia hadn't drank as much as her cousin, but this little walk helped her shake off that bit of tipsiness, and instead, her heart was gradually filled with expectation. It was a bit late, but she hoped Ashen hadn't changed his mind on their date. "Princess, watch out!" Sabael's nervous voice took her out of her reflection. He had stepped in front of her by reflex, but she could still spot the large, hooded figure standing ahead of them, right outside the castle's gates. It was a bit unnerving to cross paths with an imposing silhouette like this in the middle of the night, but Cecilia immediately recognized that familiar frame. Her heartbeat accelerated a little in anticipation, and she put a hand on Sabael's shoulder. "It's all right," she said. "Can you go and put Tessa to bed for me?" "Are you sure?" Cecilia nodded, catching a glimpse of shiny, white hair under the hood. "Yes, don't worry. Nana should still be up, tell her not to wait for me either." "I understand." Although he hadn't recognized his king under that hood, he politely nodded at the large man standing in the way, and made a little detour around him, still carrying Tessandra, a cautious expression on. He was confused as to what was going on, but he knew not to ask. Cecilia watched him walk away and disappear inside the castle with Tessandra. As soon as he was out of sight, she almost ran to Ashen. He opened his arms just in time to hug her tight, burying his face into her large curls. "I missed you," he whispered against her ear. "I missed you too. Did you wait a long time? I saw you coming back from afar, I wanted to greet you as soon as I could." "Who was that?" "Sabael? He's Neptune's big brother." "Is he interested in your cousin?" "Yes. Tessa has been the one chasing him, but I think he has feelings for her too." Good, then." Cecilia frowned, a bit confused why Ashen would care about Sabael and Tessandra's relationship, until she quickly remembered that she had touched Sabael's shoulder. She blushed. "Ashen! Are you jealous?" she muttered. She had expected him to deny or laugh it off, but instead, he very gently caressed her cheek with his palm, pulling his face closer to her. "If they see what I see, I can't blame them for falling too." His words made her blush even more as soon as she understood them. Yet, the king gently put a kiss on her lips, a naughty smile on. His lips were a bit colder, and had a faint taste of beer that evening. Had he been drinking too? Despite the misty wind blowing from the ocean, Cecilia's body warmed up instantly to the king's touch. The way he was tall enough to cover everything else had something a bit intimidating yet exciting about it. However, even hidden under a cloak, his tall silhouette was hard to conceal. The guards making rounds around the castle kept glancing their way, probably wondering who that couple was shamelessly reuniting in front of the doors. "Let's go," Cecilia suggested, pulling him inside. Ashen didn't follow her lead, though, and instead, wrapped his arm around her waist to take her to one of the side streets away from the castle. "We're having our date outside," he whispered. "I promised I'd make you see my home, didn't I?" Cecilia's excitement increased immediately, and she let him lead her. Since she had almost only ever seen him inside the castle, Cecilia couldn't help but be a bit excited about the two of them going on a date outside. Being so close to Ashen, in a foreign country, and spending time together incognito was like a dream come true. They were like any other couple going down the streets, holding each other close and acting lovingly. It was as if Ashen refused to part with her for even a second. Even as he kept his arm around her waist while walking, He made sure his coat was also partially covering her, and from time to time, would secretly surprise her with a peck on her hair or temple. Cecilia was only just now realizing how long the two of them had been due for some time alone, with no eyes on them, no bodyguards or servants around. The streets of the capital were already incredibly quiet for that time of night. It wasn't even that late yet, but they only crossed paths with a few people on the way. The shops were already closed and people were rushing to get to the safety and comfort of their homes. No one really paid attention to the tall couple walking away from the castle, quietly flirting with each other. "Aren't you cold?" he asked. "No, I'm fine." Cecilia was always a bit embarrassed at how little she could control her emotions around Ashen. Her heart was fluttering and her cheeks turned pink every single time. She could act strong and smart with anyone, but with the white-haired king, she was back to her innocent 13-year-old self again. It was a warm feeling, but she was always a bit afraid he would find her too childish. She tried to keep her breathing steady and stand tall next to him. If she hoped to really become his queen, she needed to graduate from her childhood crush to turn this into a proper relationship. It was strange. She had always felt confident, but not so interested by men's curious gazes on her. Cecilia knew she was pretty, but she also knew her cousin Tessa was prettier than her, and she wasn't interested in making herself particularly stand out either. Things were only different with Ashen. Each time she saw him, there was this terrible desire that surged within her, like a bold, feisty creature whispering in her head. She wanted his attention, his love. Something had definitely changed from her younger days now that she could experience proper desire. She wanted to always be a little bit closer to him, and to attract his dark eyes. She hated any woman near him, and the mere thought of Ashen being with another woman would make her irrationally mad. That creature was a bit scary, but it was also empowering her. Cecilia felt much fiercer, like a female dragon ready to protect her territory. He was her man. The only one for her. "We're here," he suddenly whispered. To her surprise, they had stopped outside a house like any other, just slightly bigger, perhaps. Nothing was making this house particularly stand out from the others in the same street. It was a two-story house, with a deep blue roof in a quiet alley. The neighborhood did look as if it was nicer than most, and there was no one outside, just a few street lamps every 4 or 5 houses to light the way. The house in front of them looked like it hadn't been vacant long, or it had been taken care of so nothing really looked out of place. However, there was a heavy lock on the door, and all the windows were boarded up. A little sign was even put up front to tell people to stay out. "This is your house. The one I was born in and grew up in, yeah, the only place I kept good memories in." Ashen's expression was quite solemn as his dark eyes kept staring at the building in front of them. Cecilia couldn't quite decipher his gaze, but there was something a bit sad in it. The king himself seemed to be staring with mixed feelings, a hint of nostalgia in his dark irises. After a short while, he took out a little key and went to open the lock. It opened up easily, and the king took the heavy chain off the entrance door. Cecilia could see the almost painful expression on his face. "Did you come back here before?" "Once or twice, when being in the castle gets too bothersome and I need to be alone. Sometimes I just stand here, though, for some reason, walking inside is the hardest part." No one else knows I bought this house back. I don't. I don't even really know why I bought it. He slowly pushed the door, which didn't squeak, or even make a sound. Everything was so solemnly quiet. They stepped inside in an almost religious silence. This ought to have been a pretty house a decade or two ago. The white ceiling was high, with pretty, wooden arches between the different rooms, and large, glass windows. A thin layer of dust was covering the wooden floors and the furniture, but everything else was kept in good condition. It would take but a week to put everything back into a usable state again. It was hard to imagine Ashen had grown up here, though. He was standing there awkwardly, staring around as if he had no idea what to do. Cecilia took his hand without looking, and he held hers back, as if to reassure each other with their presence. They both looked like strangers intruding in that quiet, forgotten space. There were stairs going up, but from what Cecilia had seen outside and the height of the ceiling, the second floor was probably an attic and wouldn't be high enough for their tall figures to stand. Our bedroom was upstairs, muttered Ashen, whose eyes had followed the same path. Me and my brothers. It was big for 3 boys, back then. We could run around and play in every nook and cranny. Now, I doubt I would be able to stand in there. You never told me about your brothers before. I know, he sighed. There's a lot I wasn't ready to tell you back then. He took a deep breath, and turned to the small kitchen. The glass window was letting gentle streaks of moonlight gleam over the once white tiles. A pretty basin had been carved in the middle, and small hooks were still hanging from a rail. Although it was all empty now, it must have been stuffed with all sorts of dishes and food before. There were still a few stains on some of the wooden parts. Some of the cupboard doors were left open, and Cecilia wondered if someone had previously ransacked this house. Spiders and dust hadn't been able to fully conquer the little cupboards yet. Cecilia slowly walked up to the kitchen, noticing a silver pitcher forgotten in the corner. It still had a bit of water in it. Little glass pots were lined up against the window too, one of them with small dried flowers still in it. My mother used to cook for us there, muttered Ashen. That's the place I most easily remember her at. I'd always see her back, while she stood there and cooked. She used to hum songs while cooking, to put my youngest brother to sleep when she carried him. As soon as I got big enough, she made me cut the fish and meat because she hated to do it. She was the one who first taught me how to hold a blade. What happened to her? She died from disease. Ashen's brows furrowed. She and one of my younger brothers both passed the same winter. We didn't have money for medicine, and no doctor in town. Back then, this capital was still as dangerous as the villages you've seen out there. But your father? Ashen scoffed. The general, he didn't live here. He turned around, and walked up to one of the large wooden pillars, smiling at the old, decrepit wood. Thanks to the moonlight shining through the windows, Cecilia could see his glowing white hair, and his lonely figure as his fingers followed the wood print. At around half his height, there were clear cuts made, like those done to mark a child's growth, with names on it. The highest one didn't even reach his waist. I have no memories of my father ever setting foot in this place. It was just the 4 of us. You heard that my mom was his mistress, right? God knows how many he had. He lived a few streets away from here. They met like any other couple would have, from living in the same city, but their situations were different. My mom was from a family of merchants. Poor, but independent. On the other hand, my father was born into a family of servants. He was raised to serve someone, learned how to do many tasks, and follow orders. The nobles he served were corrupt, like most of them were back then. My father was smart enough to realize those things young, although he was told to stay silent and obey. Ashen sighed, and turned around to an empty corner of the room. There was a little couch there, undoubtedly made by a skilled artisan. Cecilia could see it in the way the wood had been beautifully carved, and how the timber resisted despite the long years. Was this his mother's family's doing? The remaining pieces of furniture were those which had obviously been too heavy to steal and transport. Once she walked up to it, Ceci realized the only thing remaining was this one piece of wood. The other parts like the seat pillows and back cushions had been taken away. Her fingers followed the beautiful lines of the wood while Ashen resumed talking. The more my father witnessed the nobles' corruption, the more he realized he could rise above his birth situation. He studied secretly, and learned from their corrupted ways. I heard he was good at kissing their feet. He was probably ready to do anything that could improve his situation. He was disgusted with his master, but he still sought the protection and security nobles could provide. He even began stealing from the nobles, slowly putting money aside for himself. He probably realized marrying my mother wouldn't be his best choice either. He never intended to marry her, even as she got pregnant. He only wanted to keep her as a mistress on the side. I still don't really understand how they somehow stayed together. Ashen turned around again, walking back to the center of the room, and turned his hand into a fist, right before punching one of the arches, a bitter smile appearing on his face. This opportunistic. When the war against the Dragon Empire began, he enrolled himself into the army, thinking he'd come back covered in money and glory. You know how the war went, my father barely survived. He made himself just small enough to flee and return with the soldiers who hadn't been killed as soon as our republic yielded. My mom gave birth to me around that time, and he got her pregnant with my brother when he got back. But my father still didn't want to marry her, or even acknowledge her. Instead, he acted like a war hero, and somehow got recognized for his achievements. Ashen looked almost disgusted. Had his father really done things worth being recognized and awarded, or had he lied his way to his position, like he had done with his son's mother? It was hard to tell. Either way, Ashen was speaking like the boy who had been deceived and disappointed by his father, many times. He rose through the ranks somehow. Corruption worked well for a coward lost in a chaotic land. He became known as the Great General Ashtaran, and gladly got married to a noble's daughter when he got the opportunity. By then, the Republic was already on the verge of collapse, and the nobles were ready to do anything to keep their lands and wealth, including marrying their daughters to popular soldiers. For my father, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get himself a noble title, money, land, and a wife 15 years younger than him. I guess it was worth throwing aside the mother of 3 of his children. Cecilia felt terribly sorry for Ashen. She didn't know any of this before. When they had met 7 years ago, he had never said a word about his family, or even where he came from, his past. Her family had taken care of a broken, young man, who had lost all will to live. She slowly walked up to him, and grabbed his hand again. She felt Ashen's fingers gently hold hers back, and he slowly turned around, but his eyes went to the names on the wooden pillar. I had to watch my father rise and become a beloved king with a family that wasn't us from afar. People recognized him in the streets, and his new, young wife had already given him more children. Why would he have cared about my dying mother and brother? His voice broke a little on those last words, the heartbreaking sound of anger and sadness combined. Cecilia could feel all of those painful memories through their skin's touch. How did the young Ashen feel, watching the castle from afar where his father was living with another family? What had his mother felt after being abandoned by her children's father? How did those boys grow up, sons of a king that didn't care for them? The more she heard, the smaller this place felt. Perhaps their mother had been able to care for all three boys long enough that their childhood wasn't unhappy, but the truth was still there. Ashen, being the oldest, had probably known all of this better than his younger brothers, and had been angry in his mother's stead. Didn't he try to help you at all? When your mother fell sick? Ashen scoffed. You probably heard about how my father's reign went. He was so obsessed with his new power, he increased the people's anger toward nobles, and became the worst tyrant to have ever led this nation. So many people were executed. At first, it was seen as necessary because the kingdom was in such chaos, but as time went by, all those deaths felt less and less justified. My father even had his own wife's family executed, claiming they had committed treason, when he himself had stolen from them for years. He was in a hurry to get rid of everyone who could have hindered his newfound power, I suppose. Those who weren't supporting him were against him, simple as that. Even his wife didn't dare to speak up. I feel sad for that woman, but at least she was spared from the disease and hunger that took over the streets. The bodies accumulated outside the capital became a nest for disease, and with the money already lost in the war and so many people having been executed, things were going too fast. The officials didn't have time to properly confiscate and redistribute the dead's wealth. People began to steal what they could to survive, even if they risked execution for that. This matched Neptune's words about her childhood. A time of fear and death. The peace the new general-turned-king had brought had become the seed for an even worse era. It was hard to think Ashen was speaking about something that had happened just a decade ago when she had seen the beautiful, peaceful streets of the capital now. It only emphasized how hard he had worked to undo all of his father's past mistakes. What about you? Cecilia muttered. Ashen scoffed. When my mother and brother fell sick, I was left alone to care for them. At first, Mom claimed they'd be fine with a bit of herbs, but I could see what was going on in our streets. The bodies and the sickness that was spreading. All the decent doctors had fled the capital, or died trying to help others. I could steal and hunt well enough to provide food, but I had no knowledge in medicine, and my mother and brother were not getting any better. My little brothers cried day and night for so long. At some point, I got desperate enough that I tried to ask for my father's help. He was a stranger to me, but I knew enough to hope he wouldn't leave us this way. I knew how rich he had gotten. So I swallowed my pride, and I walked there, ready to beg for help. But the doors to the castle remained closed for a nobody like me. No one knew I was the great King Ashtaran's son. Cecilia felt her heart sinking, hearing this. She could feel the extreme anger and sadness in his voice. Ashen couldn't see her, even as she gently hugged him. His eyes were lost in dark, painful memories. I waited outside for days, asking again and again for my father. The guards refused to open up. The king didn't receive anyone, not even some kid who was claiming to be his. I'm so sorry. Cecilia's voice was breaking a bit. As if she could feel all of his sadness, she felt like crying too, and she could only try to repress her tears. This was so horrible to even imagine. The young Ashen, desperate to save his family, and a father that never acknowledged him. The amount of time he ought to have spent alone outside the castle's closed doors, waiting, praying, hoping for some miracle, or someone to help his dying family. After a short silence, she heard him sighing, and to her surprise, Ashen hugged her back, his fingers gently combing through her curls as if she was the one in need of comforting. She heard him sigh faintly. As you can guess, they didn't make it. My brother and I buried them in one of the communal graves, like anyone else, and we did our best to survive on our own. We stole and held on to this house for as long as we could. There was no work in the capital, and nothing anywhere else. The king's reign had brought so much more anger and fear. Civil war was already threatening to explode in the third year of his reign. His wife's only son was killed by his enemies, and their 2 daughters had died young. He was probably desperate for an heir. That's when my father suddenly remembered he had fathered a few sons. I swear, the day he showed up at our house, expecting to find our mother with us, I was ready to murder him, but I didn't, for my younger brother's sake. Your father took you in because he wanted sons, muttered Cecilia, shocked. Yet, he believed that establishing a proper dynasty would make him more legitimate. Perhaps he was even inspired by the Dragon Empire, since the prince's popularity was supporting their fathers. Because his sons were street children who had faced difficulties like others, he thought it would be even better suited for his plan. I did not take his return well. He apologized to us, and made up some sob story about how we were his long-lost sons. I didn't believe him one bit, but it was still better to accept his newfound love for us than to risk losing my brother and dying in the streets. So I swallowed my pride, and let him take us in. I admit, he gave us all the wealth we had never even dared to imagine. At first, I was relieved, but I slowly realized he had become just as corrupt as the nobles he had once hated for it. When I began to call him out on it, he got mad, and sent me to train with his soldiers as an apprentice. I turned out to be decently good, so he sent me even more, to calm down his angry vassals and repress the rebels. He only needed one of us, so he probably thought my brother would be enough, and me expendable. I was just 14 at the time, but I was so bent on not letting anyone break me or kill me. I became good enough for those men to respect me despite my age. Ironically, I did much better than he had expected. I somehow became the new pride of this father I had loathed for so long. He used the fact that I was away to pretend to love me from afar, saying I was doing everything in his name, thinking no one knew how bad our relationship really was. But I never hid that our relationship was bad. When people realized I did come from the street and didn't share my father's rotten values, they were even more ready to listen and follow me. Unlike what he had hoped, the more he sent me out to the battlefield, the more my reputation grew, and his diminished. For a while, he wouldn't dare to touch me, but he also knew I was turning into the biggest threat he had ever faced. Cecilia felt a chill run down her spine. This father-son rivalry couldn't have ended well, but she had a feeling things were even worse than she thought. From what Yusum had told her, she remembered Ashen had been seemingly murdered by his father's enemies. However, this didn't match what she was hearing now. Why would they have killed their best hope at a change? Between a selfish king and a people-devoted, upcoming, strong, young prince who wasn't afraid to oppose the tyrant, the choice should have been easy. What happened? Realizing that me being on the field wasn't serving his interests, he got me to come back to the capital more and more often, despite me doing my best to stay away. The only reason I had to come back was my younger brother. Until, one night, I woke up to the screams of my stepmother. I already knew my father's wife wasn't happy in this marriage, but I had always thought it would be better for me not to involve myself with that woman. My brother had a different opinion. Unlike me, he lived in the castle and interacted with her more often than me. He had walked in on our father forcing himself on her. Not just once, but repeatedly. She hadn't chosen to marry him, and she probably had enough of being his thing. In fact, she was closer in age to us than she was to our father, and my brother couldn't leave her alone. He hadn't told me anything, but he had probably resolved to protect her if my father sought for her again. He was still a boy, though. My father didn't take it well. His wife was his property, you see. A good bought from his former master that he was not ready to let go of. A trophy. That night, when my brother begged him to stop assaulting her, and got between them, he refused and instead, he attacked my brother. Oh, God, no! She felt Ashen's grip tighten around her shoulders. She could feel his apparent calm was like a storm under the surface. He was merely repressing his anger from that memory. I arrived too late. I barely got a grasp of the situation. I couldn't save him. He had tried to act stronger than he was, and didn't want to involve me. My stepmother was injured too. Her screams and sobs still ring in my ears sometimes. It was the most horrible sound I've ever heard. My father was already half dragging her out, but she wanted to go to my brother's body. Perhaps there really was something between them. Once she saw me, she probably realized I was in danger too. She begged me to run. But I couldn't simply turn my back on my brother's murder. Barehanded, I tried to attack my father. He had his sword in hand, and it would have only taken him one blow. Just one. What happened next, I am not sure. The next thing I knew, that woman was stabbed in my stead, and I was pushed, falling out of the window. The last thing I saw was my father's hand, grabbing her hair and pulling her back inside. I lost consciousness when my body hit the sea. Cecilia shivered. She had seen the sea so many times from the castle's windows, she couldn't imagine anyone falling from that height and surviving. It explained the many scars on Ashen's body, though, and the terrible state they had found him in. He gently caressed her hair. I have no idea how I survived that fall, nor how long I spent adrift at sea. There was a storm that night, but I didn't drown. I still believe the gods favored me somehow, for how I was lucky that I fell on a side without rocks that my body could have crashed onto, or how the waves pushed me away from the capital. When I woke up, my body was floating along the Saha at dawn, and the river took me all the way up to the north. He suddenly cupped Cecilia's cheeks between his hands, and had her look up to him, smiling at her. All the sadness from earlier seemed to have somehow disappeared, replaced by his gentle, relieved expression. That's when a curious little princess and her dragon found me, half dead. Cecilia blushed, but smiled back at him. She knew what had happened next, this time. We found you in the north, she muttered with a smile. I remember. You were drifting, and covered in remnants of blood. I thought you were already dead when I called my brothers to drag you out. Without your mother, I probably would have died, muttered Ashen, and without you, I would have chosen to. He let out a long sigh and kissed her forehead, very gently. I thought I had lost absolutely everything. My home, my family. I thought it was time I gave up on life. There was nowhere to go home to, absolutely nothing I wanted anymore. You didn't talk for so long, Cecilia remembered. We thought you were mute for real. I was depressed. I had no will to live left. I thought your family's kindness was unnecessary. I didn't get what I could possibly want from life, after everything that had happened. But, unlike my expectations, I didn't die. Not only did I not die, but you were almost dragging me back to a normal life. I was shocked that your family didn't expect anything from me. You healed me, fed me, and clothed me without expecting anything in return. You were just happy to have me around. You helped with the chores. It was more than enough. No, you don't get it. If it had been just me, I would have probably found a place to let myself die, or jumped off a cliff or something, but I couldn't do that after your mother had spent so much time healing me. Plus, you just weren't leaving me alone. You had no idea what was going on inside my head, but you still wouldn't let go of my hand, and you took me everywhere with you, and you were so innocent and pure and kind. You didn't care that I didn't talk, you'd show me your world, anyway. The smallest things made you happy, and you shared them with me. You were like the sun to me. More than any of your siblings, I was always attracted to your smile, your gentleness. How you cared for all your younger siblings made me feel like there was someone else like me, devoted to their family. That the choices I had made so far made sense, that it wasn't all worthless. That there was always someone, somewhere, who could need me. Even if they weren't my family. I realized you had taken me from having no will, nothing I wanted, to me needing you. Kissing her forehead once more, he then slowly moved to join their foreheads together. The two of them breathed so slowly, it felt like everything around them had suddenly gone incredibly quiet and calm. As if it was just the two of them left in this city, the other's skin the only source of warmth. Their faces were so close, but they kept their eyes closed, neither of them moving, both lost in those blessed memories they created years ago. Your home became my paradise. Despite my grief, I felt happiness like I had never before. I was healing, slowly. Both my body and my mind. You were the best medicine, and I was addicted to you. Every day, I was looking forward to your expressions, your movements, your smiles. I wanted to see what you'd do, what would make you happy or excited. The way you smiled at your mom, and how small you were next to your father. How strong the bond was with your siblings. It was like watching a dream from afar. I didn't expect to be part of it, but of course, your family wouldn't hear of it. You don't know how everything your family did was precious to me. Cashin and Darson treated me like a brother. Your mother was there to listen when I needed to talk. Your father took me under his wing, and taught me how to be a real fighter. Your parents knew where I came from, and perhaps, they figured I'd go back someday, so they prepared me, the best they could. Cecilia knew. She could remember the blessed days where she had spent the whole day watching Ashen and her brothers train together. How he had become a part of her family, someone she genuinely loved. Until her feelings had gradually moved to a different kind of love, along with the months. She was young, but this was when her first feelings as a woman blossomed. Ashen was handsome, hard-working, honest, and kind. Perhaps she had felt a bit of his feelings for her too, but Cecilia had a hunch that, even if he hadn't loved her, she would have fallen in love with the boy from back then. She liked how calm and composed he always was, his gentle movements that spoke more than his few words. She smiled, and gently caressed his cheek, looking into his dark eyes. His face was framed by his silver-white hair, gleaming under the moonlight. His hair wasn't completely white when they had found him, but it already had a handful of white or grey strands, as if Ashen had been 3 or 4 times his real age. According to her mother, it was something that could be caused by stress, or poison, but this was an extremely rare condition, with no known cure. As if his body had needed to express all his trauma, in some way. The discarded prince was well fed, and had a strong body, but his scars and white hair were proof of all the hardships he had gone through. "You're strong," she muttered. "I didn't know how much you endured back then. You didn't show any of it, and when you came back, you did what you could, didn't you?" Ashen sighed, his expression darkening. "You know I didn't choose to come back," he groaned. "When your father told me to leave, he said I should go back and finish what I had started. I never thought he had been training me all this time with the idea to send me back and let me conquer my father's throne. At least, not so soon. The way he banned me from the empire was so sudden. I felt like I was falling down from that window again, losing everything and everyone I cherished. It was like being thrown back into hell after tasting paradise for more than 2 years. My hair turned completely white then, I think. I didn't want to go back, but once I was back in my kingdom, I realized there were truly people who needed me." He took a deep breath, his eyes going down on the sword at his side. "In the end, I obeyed your father. I started from scratch, letting people believe what they wanted about my supposed death. My father had used my murder to gain sympathy, so when I got back, everything crumbled under his feet. People had already endured 2 years of civil war, they were more than glad to see me appear to put an end to it." He scoffed bitterly, a disgusted smirk on his lips. Killing him was almost too easy, he chuckled bitterly. He hadn't trained in years, he was no match for me, who had been trained for 2 years by the war god himself. Plus, those who were still debating on who to follow against him were only too happy to rally behind me, like the 9 clans. I knew some of them didn't do it only for my sake, but I figured it was better to let them follow my lead and deal with their expectations later. It only led to where we are now." He let out a long sigh. Despite how young Ashen was, he already had faint wrinkles, too many scars, and something incredibly sad and wise in his dark eyes. He had already lived one too many lives, it seemed. Cecilia smiled, and gently pulled his face closer to kiss him. "My king," she muttered. "You've really gone through a lot, haven't you?" He smiled. He liked the way the dragon princess said this, with a hint of possessiveness in it. Ever since she had appeared again, he was rediscovering the girl he had once known bit by bit, unveiling how she had grown into a strong, beautiful, and determined woman. Still, the more he learned about her, the more unworthy he felt. He didn't want to be that weak, anger-filled boy anymore. The same way he had turned from a prince to a king who had fully taken his throne with his own power, he wanted to be a strong and reliable man to Cecilia, not the self-centered he had shown her all this time. He took a deep breath, and answered her kiss back. "Let's leave," he said. She nodded, and he gently pulled her hand, the two of them leaving the house. Cecilia glanced back once more before they stepped out. Even if this place was filled with melancholy, she could feel it had been the home of some happy days too. Hopefully, it would be able to host more in the future. "Now you know," Ashen sighed once they were outside. "I'm sorry it took me so long. You're the first person to know all of this, about my past." "Thank you for telling me," she said calmly, "but it doesn't change anything, Ashen." His hands froze on the lock he was busy putting back. He finished locking it, and turned to her, taking her hand with a worried expression. "What doesn't change? What are you talking about?" Cecilia sighed calmly, and caressed his cheek once more. "You're still a prince, in their eyes, a prince they want to manipulate to do their bidding. You haven't finished the task my father sent you to do. Finish what you started here. End the wars and bring peace to your home country." "Cecilia, I'll help you," she added with a gentle smile. "Don't worry. I'm stronger than you think, and so are you. We can do this, together." Ashen hesitated for a few seconds, caressing her cheek with a solemn look. "I know. But I am afraid I'm going to involve you in something you shouldn't have to go through if it wasn't for me. Given a couple more years, maybe you could have come when I had finally pacified this kingdom. And maybe you wouldn't be able to do it without me," Cecilia calmly retorted. "Ashen, I chose to come here. It was not on a whim, but by my own choice. It's not just about you. I have some things to prove to myself too. I just chose to do it by your side."